Hopefully yeah, it looks like we're set up. Hopefully everyone can hear me. I will see the chat room light up if you cannot. Welcome and thank you to the organizers for putting this together. I think it's an excellent way to bring all the WSU campuses together. Today, I'm going to talk about universal design for learning in online spaces. And you may have heard, but the internet's going to catch on. It's going to be pretty big. So I may not hit the online space you specifically are thinking about, but hopefully we'll see things that can transcend. We're going to talk about things that you're probably already doing in your classes if you are teaching. And we'll also maybe give another context for things that you could consider or ways to consider. And before we get going, I just want to stress, sometimes when we talk about UDL and universal design for learning, and it sounds like, and can be daunting, but it can sound like it's a lot, it's more work. And of course, that's always a challenge. And it can be, but it can also make your job easier. A well-designed course runs so much more smoothly and is so much more fun to do. You spend less time troubleshooting the things that you don't want your students struggling with so that you can help them with the things that they do struggle with. And that's the material that we all love. So just to plug out that for universal design for learning, just how much more fun it can make teaching as well. I want to give a shout out. Make sure I can advance my slides here. Give a shout out to the folks on this campus who have really helped me learn a lot about UDL. Just like every person, I have leveraged, although stolen, ideas from lots of people. So the folks in academic services, the Access Center, and our librarians, all of whom are great resources also on your campus. So just to start off, I just wanted to say, and we've heard this before, that there is no average student. When we design a course for the average student, we actually designed it for no one. No one's the average student. Everybody brings something else to those classes. So, but we know that we do our best. And one of the things that we think about as instructors when we're in the classroom is removing barriers for students. And that's really so that we can get them to those learning outcomes. And that's absolutely all of our goals. And when we think about UDL, we also think about creating other pathways and removing those barriers, those unnecessary barriers, and giving some directions and guideposts. We're putting all the packaging things around all the different paths that they can get to those learning outcomes, because in the end, that is really what we're after. So just to connect a few dots for my interest in UDL. So I began working in industry, working on commercial and consumer products. And when you are in that kind of tech industry, you often have a core technology that then you are building things around. And in the education sense, we've got our disciplines or the course or the thing that we're really focused on in the course. But one thing I took away from industry is that you can have a great core technology, but if you can't build everything around it so that it works in an ecosystem, that it works for everybody or a large number of people, it's unlikely not going to take off, that somebody else will have done that same thing, just perhaps better. And then when I came to WSU early on in my time at WSU, I was fortunate enough to have a student who in a more advanced math class that had a low incident disability, which means, especially in math, that we are not accustomed to those kinds of accommodations. So I worked very closely with the Access Center, the great folks, and we came up with ways to accommodate that student. But the way I really had looked at it was, this student clearly can succeed. So if this student can't, that's on us. That was really, we were the people who put those barriers in the way. And I just want to pull out a quote from the keynote speaker, that the barriers are in the curriculum, not the learner, right? And so that is really a great way to view it, because this student did succeed and went on to take other advanced math classes with me and did absolutely great. And then lastly, I also started to make flipped classrooms because some of my classrooms ended up, there were students struggling. I thought, well, how can I better do this? How can I better support those students? And I really got a chance to get to know the students better with in the active learning environment and see how these other resources with other supports really help students succeed. So all those things kind of circle around universal design for learning, just kind of considering the whole package and the diversity of people who are our learners. All right. There we go. So I want to take a second. By the way, I just want you to know I just got a new phone, and this is the first picture I took on with that phone. It is the picture of a restroom here. Yes, I thank you. Please acknowledge the high quality of this picture. It is a restroom on the first floor here in Vancouver, and I want to just take a minute. And I'm going to time myself, so I'm not even going to mute the pictures or anything. Take a minute and say good morning again to your neighbor. Maybe you're sitting in a different place. Say hello to the people next to you. And we're just going to play a little game about finding the accommodation or accommodations in this picture. So I'm going to take 1 minute, say hello to your neighbor with your words, and then discuss. What are these accommodations? All right, I'm gonna pull us back together. Hopefully you have enjoyed this picture. But just, you may have noticed a number of things. So as we take a look, the first thing you might have noticed is that there is a button so that it will open the door automatically, which is great for people with mobility issues. So that is I think what we sometimes think of as, oh, that's the obvious accommodation. However, I think there are a few more in this picture that you may have found. So one is that we have a push door instead of something with a doorknob. And so that makes it easier to open. Also, this is a visual clue that you should push the door because there's nothing to pull on. So it's accommodating people in the sense of telling them where to push and the fact that there's no doorknob. You also might have noticed there's a sign for the men's room. Someone in our room noticed that there is a little bit under there that looks like there's Braille. Also, I'm just going to point out the fact that there's a sign indicating the bathroom is also an accommodation. You in your home probably do not have a sign indicating it's a bathroom, so we are accommodating people who are unfamiliar with this building. Also, there's a bathroom. That is also an accommodation for people who use bathrooms. But okay, yeah, but I mean, yeah, it didn't have to be there, right? And then lastly, there's a caution sign, slippery when wet, that accommodates people who are susceptible to gravity. So if you slip, you fall, but for those who have trouble with gravity, right? So there's actually a lot of accommodations here, and universal design for learning is not all about just the accommodations when you get the letter from the Access Center. So in fact, and one of the professors who Dana Lee Baker, who used to be at WSU Vancouver, said this to me, and it made me really think, disability is a social construct, right? If everyone could levitate, or nearly everyone could levitate, then those stairs would also be an accommodation for the few who could not, right? So society decides what is a disability and what is not. And that means really that this idea about accommodations or making things or removing barriers is really is a spectrum. And so it's not just around making things easier for people with disabilities, it's for considering all barriers. Okay, I grabbed this from the Cornell teaching resource website. And I really, this is just a definition that they use for universal design for learning, slightly different than the one from the CAS system, but it works to accommodate the needs and abilities of all learners and eliminates unnecessary hurdles in the learning process. And I wanted to just highlight that unnecessary part, because that unnecessary part is there are hurdles to learning. Productive struggle, that is how you learn, is when you struggle with something. And so it's really this idea about, yeah, the students are going to struggle with things in your class, but let's not have them struggle with things that they don't have to, the things that are unnecessary or ancillary to your course. And sometimes students won't even know what they are. They may know what they are and they won't tell you what those barriers are, or they may not even know what they are for themselves. So we also use this phrase, designing for the margins, although I'm going to add in there, or at least what we thought were the margins. So I'm going to tell a little bit about my my first flipped course, and that was Math 103. And I have taught this in what was considered the traditional way before. And that traditional class is a book, a lecture, then you send them off to do their homework, and then you give them a test. And so if we just take a look at how that worked, that book was, no one reads a math book. You know, there was something about assigned readings. We assigned maybe 3 pages of reading, but 3 pages is too much in a math book sometimes. Lectures, and I mean, I felt like they were amazing lectures. It turns out, though, lectures aren't for everyone. And here's maybe where my own experience, I was the student who went to a lecture and, oh yeah, I don't need to read the book because I just got it from lecture. I could listen and process and take notes and all at the same time formulate questions when I had them. And that was not every student. So lectures are for many people hard to follow, especially in real time, especially if you want them to then start generating questions and asking things. We would, in class, be able to cover a few little examples, and then I'd send them off and wish them luck with their homework. And then finally, I'd give them a test, and that's when I got to really hear the student voice. And that voice was telling me, hey, I didn't get all of this, right? So I did flip this class. I'll just explain what my flip class looks like. There are a few different versions. But a flipped class is, in my case, I presented the material in short video format. And then I also created a check for the students. So they would give them a comprehension assessment. This was a low stakes formative assessment. And they would get multiple opportunities to do that. So if they didn't do well, they could go back and review the videos. They could ask me questions. They could just pause and think about it a little bit. Then we would, in class, we will have made room to do more active learning. So we were able to let, as opposed to watching me do it at the whiteboard, they were getting to do it and even talk about it, present what they did, discuss with their peers, discuss with me, get feedback right away. So all of those online resources also enabled active learning, which, by the way, an active learning environment in a math class is key for engagement as opposed to listening. So when you hear about the UDL principles, sometimes what you're doing or providing also makes room for some of those engagement parts. And then when they left, they were actually much more prepared to go on and do their homework because they will have already started it, done some examples, received feedback, and essentially also more than just introductory samples. So if we take a look, my book then became a set of videos and a book. My lecture, which was contained in these short videos, it doesn't have to be an entire class length. These lectures were now places where they could pause me. They could slow me down. They could speed me up when they were doing fine. And I also gave them a chance to check their understanding. Their homework, now they've already received feedback when I asked them to do it on their own. They've had a chance to do it together in a group, get peer feedback, get my feedback. Also, the student voice, I got to hear the student voice every day. I got to sit down with them, listen to them explain things, see what vocabulary made sense or was unclear. And so it also, being able to post all of those things in the online space gave me a chance to really hear what the students were able to, what they were doing, what they were thinking. And I just recall a comment about when you do a course over and over and you add these UDL elements, it really helps to have something like this for me to hear the student voice, because that also tells me what elements to add in terms of what the students need, right? You accumulate that knowledge. So I'll just remind us here, we're going to see this probably in every presentation today, I hope, the 3 principles of UDL. And so engagement, motivation, representation, different ways of accessing that material, and multiple ways of expressing that for students. So the action and expression. So I'm going to shift my focus now to talk a lot about the online, what this means in an online presence. And for the most part, we're going to have the context of using the learning management system, in our case, Canvas for most of us. And we're going to see how this might look. So I was trying to figure out how to organize this in my head, and it was not easy. But then my head finally decided I need to organize it somehow. So I broke it up, and we're going to work from the inside out, because I'm in math and you work from the inside parenthesis outward. But we're going to start with those individual postings, the things that you provide, those extra resources that you provide to students. Then we're going to take it up a level and talk about modules. We'll talk about your Canvas course space in general, and then we'll talk a little bit about university and department tools and standards. Okay, so let's dive on in. Some of these slides have a lot of words, but you don't have to read all the words. So for me, near and dear to my heart is the posting of videos. So I did a lot of video production. I think my first flip class, I think it was nearly 150 videos, short videos, like 5-minute videos that they would get to watch during the course of the semester. But you don't have to make every video depending on where you are at and what you're doing. Sometimes you can actually just provide some fantastic YouTube video with fantastic levels of production, and that just might generate some enthusiasm for the topic. You can make your own videos. I did that for as another way to represent the material in class. But I have, in a different class, I've also used someone else's videos and then use that as a means of representation. And I think it's also great when students can do this, when students can generate something. So students could generate a video to express themselves as well. There's a lot of students who like to do little filmmaking on their videos. And so maybe that's appropriate for a class project or assignment. So a couple little tips. I just want to you're going to see some of these tips. We don't have to necessarily go through all of them, but a lot of them have to do with giving students control, as well as designing for the margins. So we think about how videos are typically consumed, but they're not always consumed that way. So one thing around control for students is, and it was especially true for the videos I produced, was to give them control over the playback speed. Some students don't need to listen to me go at the speed I go at. They might want to speed me up just a little bit, but they also can pause me and rewind and go back, right? So they get control over all these things, including the size of the screen, if they're not working on their phone. Captions are, of course, an accommodation for people with hearing loss, and that's really important, but I've heard from many students that they like to have the captions on just to have them on. So those captions are used by more than just people with hearing loss. You may, and I'll just make that, I put that little asterisk to remind me that auto captioning is great, but is not sufficient for an accommodation, right? And the folks in the Access Center, and we are fantastic at providing appropriate captions. So just to put a plug out there to not just leave it at auto-generated captioning, especially for academic topics where, when you're talking about Cauchy sequences, good luck with that caption. Posting transcripts. If you have a chance to post transcripts, that is often preferred by people who use screen readers. And make your videos a manageable size. Just recording a lecture, if you are recording a lecture, try and break it up into chapters so that students can access chapters. But I think it's great to have just shorter videos. And then, of course, student-made content should also focus on being accessible, especially if it's going to be posted in the online forum. So make sure that, and that's great practice for students. They'll also learn that skill. Audio is another thing. This is something that I don't do very much in terms of audio, because I'm often doing demonstrations in my videos. but audio can have those same effects where it's engaging. It's another level of representation. I mean, think about like that great NPR interview you listen to and you learn so much from. And then, of course, students can also probably more easily make audio. And so if it's a great way for students to give expression. And again, just some tips. It's all about control, giving students control over volume, speed of playback, the ability to stop, pause, rewind, section. Transcripts are great for the same reasons. If you can break them into shorter, or at least give chapters in those audios so that they know, kind of just like in a book, you don't just want a book with no paragraph markings, no way of knowing when you have to pause and what you're going to go back to, where you can take a break, get yourself a cup of tea. And an added little star for this one, and we've, as faculty members, we've run into this all the time. Not everything works with every device. And that is one of those unintended barriers that we fight with often. So just if you're providing a link, make sure it's a really common audio format like MP3. Okay. I'm gonna, again, too much text, so I'm gonna go pretty quick over this. But text is, for a lot of people, engaging, especially for producing it, right? Or there can be really, really engaging text. It is somewhat the standard that we have had in academia, but some things that have not been standard is giving students control over that text. So if you give it in a format where they can change the font size, or, and I can't believe I didn't know this until just a few years ago, you can change the paper color so you're not staring at a computer screen that is blinding you. You can make a gray paper. Make sure you include alt text for the pictures. For those of us in very specific disciplines, math, chemistry, as an example, some of the things that you create, especially if you're using, say, Word, those are not screen readable. So if someone's using the read aloud function and you use the Word version, it's just gonna go past it or say image. So make sure that you have an accessible plugin for that, and they exist in every discipline. And again, make it easy to navigate. Manageable sections, helps students along the way. So that was a lot of text, but all I just want to point out is that all of these things actually work together. When we talk about multiple representations, sometimes we think it means, okay, I'm going to give them they can access this information via text, or they can watch the video, or they can listen to the podcast, or whatever it is. But actually, these things all work together, and students will use them together, so they can reinforce each other. A student is much more likely, in my class, to look at the textbook and try and read it after they watch my video, as opposed to jumping in and doing it before. All right. Let's just, another thing I wanted to mention was to beware of this textbook as a default. We think of text as being the default way, the center of the universe. And I think about Dr. Rao's picture of at the end of her presentation with the students in the bubble and a few students on the outside. If I could remake my slides, I would remake that picture to look at the traditional way that we had done math classes with. It was really actually just a few students on the margins who were really, that's their preferred way of learning. And by adding in these extra resources in the video and incorporating active learning into my class, I actually include what might be the design center. So it's important. I think it's a good idea to sort of challenge yourself to think, is the traditional way, the way that we've come to teach these courses and think of it as the standard way, is that actually the design center, or was that actually on the margins? And can we make something that is much more central to everyone? All right, just as a word of encouragement, I'm going to show you one of my older videos, and so you can see the production value of this.
All right, so this is section 5.5 in our book, and it's on the greatest common factor.
That's about all I can stand to watch of my own videos. I apologize. But you can see that, and I thought, when I did this for the first time, I thought, well, I don't even know if students are going to watch these videos. That was one of the things that I measured with Kristen Lessig when we studied this course. We had very high uptake of watching these videos. Students found them very helpful. They don't have to be flashy. They don't have to have high production value. They just appreciated the fact that now they can watch this lecture at their own pace. They have control over the lecture, when to pause me, when to write something down, when to skip over something. And so the videos, I just put that up there just so you don't think that you're going to have to make a movie. Students are consuming their movies somewhere else. So it can be, I think it can be pretty basic. All right, so that was just to encourage or give some ideas and tips about individual postings for multiple representations of material, how that can really help us. Now I'm going to move up into start to think about those executive functions that were mentioned earlier. How do we organize our material? How can we help students come through that material? And so a lot of faculty, I think, when we organize our material in our Canvas course, we do it by the week or by a topic. And so when we don't just throw it in there, although that is what my current PC desktop looks like, but on my Canvas space, I have it pretty well organized. And I like to think of a module as a one-stop shop, that when students enter into that module, whether it's for a topic or for a week or whatever it is, that in that one place, they can find all that they need for that week. So in some ways, you can either explicitly or implicitly create a checklist so that students know what they're doing in that module, what material they're going to review. Hopefully, you're going to include some low stakes assessments so they can have some way to check how they're doing with that material, right? And I think that that's something in an online space that we can do now that we would have struggled with before we had all the online tools that we have. So creating some low stakes assessments for students so that they can check to see if they're getting out of the material what they should. You can provide, if you have an assignment, provide some examples and sample work. So I appreciated the discussions around these, giving all these choices for assignments and students having trouble deciding what it is they should be doing. And I think that sometimes if it's appropriate to provide examples or sample work, that also helps students gauge. It's another way for them to know if they should be, if they should take this on or if they're doing too much. And then not everything fits in one module, right? There are projects and things that span across the entire semester. So all that scaffolding that you do, it's great to give reminders, checkpoints for those projects, make sure that they're on track for those as well. So you can give students a lot of guideposts so that they can be successful in your course. This is what, I mean, they also don't have to be fancy, but this is what my a module looks like in my course. And it's not much at all, right? It is simply, I want you to watch these videos. There's an intended order, video 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then a small comprehension assessment. That's it. The homework is assigned after we've worked on it in class. So that's why it's not included in the module, because I don't want them starting the homework right now. But I do use the calendar function in Canvas. And so that's another way to give students a reminder of how to complete the assignment. So the idea about your modules is really, when students come here, all I'm asking them to do is contained right in this little module or folder, however you like to think about it, just videos, do the comprehension assessment, take it a few times if it didn't make sense. One thing we found in the research was also not every student watched every video every time. However, we had a really high uptake on the comprehension assessments, which were worth a small percentage of their grade. That is another way for students to engage with the material. So we actually have not just the videos, but the small comprehension assessments are also ways you can have to get your students to engage with the material. I am fortunate in this class that it is a very that there isn't a lot of variation, that this is what we do, this is our daily activity. I know that not everyone has that opportunity to have kind of the same structure week by week or module by module. But I would urge you to strive for consistency, because students, you don't know which tools students are going to depend on. Some students use the Canvas calendar, other students don't. Some students actually take I print out the syllabus that has a schedule. Some students use that paper copy, and that's how they follow my class. So not every student is going to follow your class in the same way, but consistency, I think, is really key to making it easier for students to know what they're supposed to be doing so that they can help organize their work and they can focus on the material that is really important to our class. So if you make a weekly checklist, make it every week. If you use the Canvas for calendar for some assignments, try to use it for all your assignments. And that would include sort of those scaffolding checkpoints if they're working on large papers or things like that. I also time release my material, so my material isn't just thrown up and accessible to the class for the entire semester. It's on a timed release, but so try to consistently have that set up to release this in the same pattern every time. So I think that consistency is really just so that students can kind of plan their life around it, because even though I like to think my class is the only class they're taking, and it's the only thing they've got going on in the world, I have been told that is not true. So, and I just kind of thought, what did I used to do before? As students are running for the door, I used to yell, here's what they're supposed to do next, right? So setting up these things in your online spaces, you can still yell at them as they're running out the door, but it's maybe not a foolproof method. So again, using those online tools can really help accomplish the things that were always a little bit sketchy when we were doing them before. Okay, let us move up to the Canvas space. So we've figured out about creating individual postings. Now we've thought about how to organize a module and try and make it self-contained and easy to follow, and creating some guidelines. Just a few words about using the entire Canvas course. And there's just a couple of things, but I just want to mention that every time a student takes your course, we would love it if all they had to focus on was our material, but they also have to figure out how Paul Krous's course is organized, what are the expectations, when are things going to be due, how are they due, all those things, they also have to figure it out. And again, because they are not just taking me for all their courses, they have to figure that out for everyone, and it's a little bit different for everyone, right? So your Canvas space, your online space, whatever that online presence is, can really be helpful in helping students figure out how to do your course, and not the content part, but the actual structure and course part. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can help navigate the course, how you can help them plan and organize their work, some of those executive functions around how to course, and then also maybe tracking their own progress. So the first thing is just make your course easy to navigate. That's it. I always think that, they are spending lots of time on my course page because it's so fantastic, but they're not. They would much rather be watching a TikTok video or going to YouTube or whatever. So just keep it simple, make it easy to follow. Bells and whistles, that's, there are tons of people who are making things that are just flashy and entertaining. Mine should be a little bit boring and just easy and predictable and easy to follow. One thing I think that's important to do is to have your students, if you are not using a ton of online content or posting a lot of things, but try to get some routine where your students are visiting the course space regularly. I mentioned I got a new phone, and that was that picture of the restroom door. I just paired my phone to my vehicle. So apparently it includes some swear words. because not a lot of fun, but that's the thing. I don't do that every week. I don't pair my phone to my car but once. And so that's why it's such a struggle. If I did it every week, I would pair my phone easily all the time. I was telling one of my brothers about this, and he said, oh yeah, my vehicle loses my phone, so I have to do it all the time. And so he can do it, like that on his vehicle, right? So they're all a little different. So establishing those routines helps students also be familiar with the tools that you're using. So try to make something where they're coming up to your course space regularly. I always like to keep my university supports front and center, pin them at the top. We offer a lot of supports for students that they don't always take advantage of, but it's great if you can just have that be that reminder every time they log in, and then just make everything obvious, I think is my other bit of advice for your course space and how to navigate it. This is what the top of my Canvas page looks like. So no, you're not going to come out here for fun, but it tells how to access tutoring, how you can get to my office hours via Zoom if you are doing it via Zoom, and the course syllabus is there. And then right after that, it's modules. It's boring, but I think it's effective. Now, I will just put this out there that this is a course where I have a lot of contact with students, and we are generating that engagement in the classroom, in the active learning classroom. And so I've got that as my advantage. If you have a much bigger online presence and maybe less of a face-to-face presence, maybe you're doing a hybrid course or it's a fully asynchronous online course, then most definitely you need to use your space to generate some enthusiasm and some engagement, right? So you might want a little more flash and pizzazz, not distracting, but something that is much more engaging, right? So if that's the case, then yeah, you will want to invest in those. But if that's not going to be the primary function of your course page, then don't do it. It's also easier. But it's being purposeful, right? So my engagement is coming somewhere else. It's not, this page is not intended to do that. But if you do have a page that needs to do that, then absolutely, right? All right. And another thing is around planning and organizing your work. So again, these work routines, maybe you're going to create a discussion forum. If you have cracked the nut about making useful discussion posts, excellent. I'm still working on doing them better. They are not always easy. The best advice I heard for a discussion post was make it useful, not separate from class, but into class. So maybe you use it to introduce a new topic. Maybe you use it to start a peer review process. So there are ways I think that you can do it rather than just, post once, reply to 2 people, and then get out of there as fast as you can. So discussion forums, I think, can be great, but they are tricky, I think, to make engaging. So they do take work. Again, make consistent use. Again, this planning and organizing. I use the calendar feature. I also use the syllabus. Maybe in your, if you do make a checklist in your modules, remind them that they do have an end of term project, an end of term paper, whatever it is, just so that you're helping them know what their work is and where they should be, as opposed to the way I did my term papers in college, which was the ubiquitous night before. So you can help students with that. Your checklist, I'm just going to point out again, those checklists can be implicit or explicit, right? So the fact that due dates show up for those comprehension assessments, those modules are in a very specific order, that is a form of a checklist. It can be implicit or explicit. And then I think this is a great thing for our online spaces, is the opportunity to self-assess, that you can give them even more. I mean, we do this in class, but you can also do this online. So low stakes formative assessments so that students can know if they are getting out of the material what you intended them to do. You can also, of course, help them get things out, what they want out of the material. There was the great idea of posting maybe a guide for the reading as a video. Keep your gradebook current. The gradebook is fantastic. and try to have things go into the gradebook. I know early in the semester it can be hard, but if you have some early assessments or some early assignments, students will get to know early on if they are, how they're progressing in the course, as opposed to being surprised at midterm. So some early assessments are especially key for helping students know if they've started that semester on track. It also helps you know if they've started on track. And then something I'm looking at doing here is creating their own personal journal so that they can track how much they're putting into the class. It's not something that I would grade or judge. It's really just, for them to reflect. And then if they come to me and something's not working, we can look over and see what they did. Like, oh, well, you're doing big chunks. Maybe we want to do smaller chunks at a time. Or sometimes students spend way too much time struggling with something when it would be more efficient for them to come and get help, because that's what we're here for. And I asked the question, are course analytics universal design for learning? So they don't really help, course analytics, when you use those tools in Canvas, they're not there to help with student engagement. They're not there to help with representation. Students aren't expressing themselves. But what it might be doing is telling us as instructors, we've intended to design for the margins. Analytics will help us know if we are reaching those margins. So the analytics are not necessarily a UDL practice, but they are a way for us to measure the effectiveness of our universal design for learning. And last but not least, fortunately, this is actually pretty quick. So we have talked about postings. We've talked about now organizing a module or a topic. Then we've talked about how to maybe make a course in your Canvas page if you're using Canvas, something that you can follow. And then finally, up one more level, does your course page, Canvas page, look a lot different from your colleagues? Because again, they're not just taking my course, they're also taking other people's courses. So if this idea of a common look and feel is ubiquitous across the tech sector, because it's hard to relearn these things, as I discovered trying to pair my phone to my car. So make sure that, if we can, in your department, strive for something that looks relatively common, or at least have common elements. Also, using university-supported tools is great. They've been vetted for accessibility, so they would be good for accommodations. When students have trouble, you're helping out the IT support staff who are supporting those tools so that they can help. The number of times something hasn't worked on an iPad of certain OS version, blah, blah, blah. I'm thankful that the IT department can help as opposed to me. And then the last little bit is that if you are going to do something that is not a standard tool, it should be purposeful. New technology for the sake of new technology, in most cases, for most classes, be very purposeful of why you're introducing it, and make sure that you are supporting that for students when you are doing it, that you've got some warm activities. Don't just throw them to the help page, which I don't think that we would do, but it's just the idea to be very, very thoughtful when you're introducing a new technology. Okay, so just a little brief summary. This is the way I organized it in my head. This may not be the way you would do it, but we talked about individual postings. That addresses a lot of around multiple representation of materials. And we talked about modules, and that really helps facilitate working through all that material. What is an effective way? How can a student know when they are getting out of that material what we were hoping for? And then when you think about up one level further to your course space, you can ask yourself if this is helping your students navigate that course space, that entire course, right? So are they able to then move through the course smoothly? And then last but not least, when we think about trying to have something, when we consider the university standards or the university tools, that also helps us ensure a smooth transition from course to course, so that students aren't learning all this new stuff for every new course and have 20,000 different logins because everyone's using different tools. So that consistency can actually really help, because I mean, actually, when you have that consistency, you are leveraging the work of the person before you, that you're not having to teach the students how to use all these tools, because if it's consistent, they will have already seen it before you. All right. But I am absolutely running short of time, and I'm not going to be the person who stands between us and lunch. That is not my, so I did have these, I had some things just around assessments and some ideas of practices. So I'm not going to say too much about that. I'm just going to kind of jump right to the end. But just to say, you know, I cannot plug enough using formative assessments and how the online tools really help. A formative assessment not only helps the student know where they're at, it helps you know where the students are at. It helps you know what you need to do to adjust in your teaching, which may be in the online space or in the in-person space. You can really get a lot out of it's another chance to listen to the students. And at least in our room, we talked about how hard it is to get students to come to your office hours or to talk to you. Formative assessments are also it can be a way to hear the student voice. So I'm going to pass over all those things because the lunch is coming, and oh, there was my little bit of math. I'm sad to leave it, but I'll just say this here. If you're giving a test in terms of student choice, especially in an online test where you're not there to answer questions, maybe just give 2 questions that test the same thing. I'm testing if they can write a proof using the principle of math induction, and I don't care if they're familiar with divisibility in the first example or summations in the second example. I'm not testing those skills. I'm testing the principle of mathematical induction, especially in an online situation where you're asking questions, giving that sort of choice so that you're not inadvertently testing a skill, you're focusing that skill on, I just want to know if they are able to construct that principle of mathematical induction proof. I don't know why I stopped in that slide other than it had the math. So here's my poker hand. Okay, I have to say this one too. When you're giving an online test, you know, try to avoid what are seemingly, you know, you think they're common cultural references. And so a very typical question in probability and counting is, how many 5-card poker hands are there? Great. If you grew up in the Midwest, like I did, and you played cards all the time. But if you grew up somewhere else where this was your deck of cards, that question's a little confusing because these are not poker cards. So I am now just going to give my last few comments, and then it's lunchtime. No one's doing this perfectly. We're all just thinking about things that we've already done and what more we could do, right? So a lot of these elements you have already done, and also you can think of more that you can do. And just like our keynote speaker said, little bits at a time. These battles are won small bits at a time. It is easier to build your course with UDL principles in mind. If you are building a new course or revamping a course or making new resources, just considering the accessibility of those resources, it's easier to do up front rather than go back and retrofit what you've done. And lastly, listen to students. We create paths, we remove hurdles, we help them along their way. That's what we do. I'm going to end with a quote here that I just stole from an article I recently did. It's somewhat of a gendered quote, although it's really the translation that's gendered. So I don't know that Galileo said it this way, but you cannot teach a man anything. You can only help him find it within himself. And that's what we do. Students have to do all of the learning. We just try and make it so that they can. All right. Some additional resources. I'm just going to say all of our campus resources. This udloncampus.cas.org, that is a great resource for higher education UDL resources from the CAST organization that has been previously mentioned. So I'll just leave that up there and I will pause and see if there are any questions or if you just want lunch.